everyone. Welcome to Constant Science. I am Don from Explosions Incorporated. A couple of weeks ago on our website, I wrote a post about what science means to me, and I kind of said that my favorite thing about science is that it allows you to think like a scientist. And when you think like a scientist, you are on the right track to figuring out the difference between things that are true or things that are false. Now, the way you do that by thinking with a scientist largely comes down to how you gather and use and interpret evidence. Now, one thing I didn't mention specifically is that you have to use all of the available evidence. You can't just pick out the evidence that supports the conclusion you already believe or that you want to be true. You have to look at the entire range of evidence, that which is contrary and that which is supporting your point of view, if you even have a point of view that you're trying to support. I mean, really, you want to go into it without a point of view and then go where the evidence takes you, but sometimes you get into something with a point of view already. You just have to make sure you look at all the evidence. If you don't, it's called cherry picking your data, and that's what I want to talk about this week. Cherry picking can be really nasty and it's fairly pernicious, especially when you watch things like the news, because any particular channel, Fox News, might have a bias that they support by only using evidence that backs up the thing that they want to push to the people that is watching their channel. Now, I could talk about data cherry picking by getting kind of technical. I could talk about the people who are anti-vaccine and how they have one study that they keep pointing to that itself was very poorly put together and was disavowed, and all but one of the authors pulled their names off of it, and it was kicked out of the journal that it was published in, and it was horrible. It doesn't actually show what it purports to show, and that is weighed against the thousands, maybe even millions of studies showing the safety of vaccines and how wonderful they've been in the last 100-odd years since we started mass producing them for various different diseases. I could talk about the people who pick out, the half a dozen or so studies that maybe indicate that there is no warming trend or that it isn't human caused in the face of the massive scientific consensus that it is. I could point to the people who find holes as they see it in the theory of evolution, and a single one of those holes crumbles the whole thing like a house of cards. All of those are evidence of cherry picking, but I thought if I wanted to really get into it, I should use something a little less technical. So one of my favorite websites is cracked.com. They have articles every single day, and almost every day I learn something new and really cool and insightful from reading their articles, and it also makes me laugh. Well, a couple of weeks ago, they had what they called a photoplasty. It's basically a Photoshop contest, and they usually use those contests as an excuse to teach people things too. It'll be like things you didn't know that happened in the background of your favorite movies or something like that. Well, this one was things Disney doesn't want you to know. And hidden in the middle of this photoplasty, submitted by a cracked user, was this picture. Now, this picture is using evidence from Snow White and Beauty and the Beast to support the conclusion that to Disney, ugly equals bad and pretty equals good. And if you stop right there, well, hell, if you stop right there, the conclusion still isn't supported, but we'll get back to the picture itself in a little bit. But you can't stop right there anyway. You need to look at the entire oeuvre, all of the opuses, whatever, I don't know, that Disney has put together over, at this point, almost 100 years as a film studio. You can't just look at a couple and go, ugly is bad, pretty is good. There's evidence to support that, of course, like Ursula from The Little Mermaid, ugly. Jafar from Aladdin is ugly. Scar from The Lion King is kind of a mangy, skinny, black and darkened guy with a scar on his eye.
I'm afraid I'm at the shallow end of the gene pool.
And look at the heroes. The Prince Charmings are all very handsome, and your Disney princesses, of course, are all very attractive. And they're generally the good guys. But here's the hero of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, this wasn't exactly a faithful adaptation of the novel, but still, it does have an ugly-ass hunchback as the main protagonist. Quasimodo here is the hero. You can argue that it was a crappy movie. I certainly would. But you can't argue that he is an ugly bad person or a pretty good person. Here's the genie from Aladdin, and while we're at it, here's the Sultan. They're both good, and okay, so the genie's a little bit weird, and the Sultan is bumbling, but they are both good characters, and they're both pretty damn ugly. You got a fat little guy and a bright blue, really kind of offensive Jewish stereotype. Now, on the other side, we have some attractive evil people. Here's Megara from Hercules. Now, of course, in the end, she turns out to come around to Hercules' side or whatever, but for the first half of the movie, she is an antagonist, and she is, in the highly stylized world of Hercules supposed to be really hot. So we have a pretty bad person. Now let's go back to the picture itself, because the picture that we used is the entire basis for this discussion of cherry picking. Cherry-picked data that doesn't even support its conclusion. So what they wanted to do was find data that supported the idea that in Disney movies, evil is always ugly, and good is always handsome. Like I said, they had plenty to choose from, but they chose possibly the two worst options to support their actual conclusion. So Snow White, there's a picture here of the evil queen, and she becomes ugly to try to poison Snow White with the apple. But do we need to forget that before she became ugly, she was the second fairest person in the land, and she was still pretty evil? She sent her stepdaughter out to get murdered by a hunter when she was attractive. And in fact, she became ugly in order to convince Snow White that she was good. Now how about the Beast here? Yeah, he gets more refined, and as he finally owns up to the jerk he had been before and becomes a good-hearted guy, he turns into an attractive man. But who's his antagonist throughout all of this? That's right, Gaston. They have an entire song dedicated to how manly and attractive he is.
Oh, there's no man in town half as manly. Perfect, the pure paragon.
And sure, it's a little bit roided out and he's kind of over the top, but he is supposed to be an attractive, manly man in this movie. And in fact, when you really think about it, kind of one of the main themes of the movie is that you can be attractive and be an ugly person, an awful thing, evil on the inside, just like Gaston, and that you can be bestial and awful on the outside and be good deep down on the inside, just like the Beast. So the movie itself kind of defeats this idea that ugly equals bad and pretty equals good, because that opposite of that message was the point of the whole movie. Now, if you want to say bad things about Disney, there are plenty of things you can say and have plenty of evidential backup. Like, for example, their whole princess thing is a crass attempt to market prettiness to girls, and it's an unsustainable and unacquirable standard of beauty with the thin waists and the gorgeous faces and all that jazz. You could argue that they're not very good at doing anything that doesn't involve white people, because to date, their two best attempts to add diversity to the catalog involved an enormous mess of insulting Native American stereotypes in a movie that was kind of a little bit a minstrel show. But hey, they're trying. Gotta give them some credit for that, I guess, right? Sure. And there are plenty of things you can say that are problematic about Disney, but to try to make the blanket statement that ugly is always bad and pretty is always good ignores an enormous amount of evidence. It is an excellent example of cherry picking to support a preconceived conclusion. Now, of course, you can cherry pick anything you want. Anything you want to support, you can find evidence in favor of it, ignore all the contrary evidence, but that is not doing good science. It's not thinking well like a scientist. Like I said at the beginning, what you want to do is gather as much evidence as possible, that which supports an idea and that which conflicts with the idea, and judge both sides. Now, often we don't have enough evidence to make a good decision. Sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. Sometimes you'll find that your preconceived idea was spot on, and sometimes you'll find that you were dead wrong, and then you have to say, hey, I was wrong, and change your belief if you want it to remain science-based. And that's all okay. That kind of thing is very, very important in science, the ability to say I was wrong because new evidence came to light. Now, as always, suggestions, ideas for topics here, leave them in the comments. Aaron will have something cool for you later this week. I don't know what he's going to talk about, but I know it will be cool because his posts and videos are always cool. So once again, I'm Don from Explosions Incorporated. Have a good one, everyone.